Stuart here. I'm going to continue the thread about projects and how they succeed and how they fail. We've come up with a tool called the POSI tool, and we're going to talk about that. But first, we got to do some definitions. So the first definition is, what is an enterprise project? And based on my hands-on working experience delivering these for a long time, if your project meets any of these criteria, hopefully 3 out of 5 at least, then it is an enterprise project, and it's big enough so that the POSI tool will render a suitably accurate verdict, or at least an approximation of a verdict. We'll talk a little bit about the POSI tool in more detail. But first, 5 rules for enterprise success. And I know I've said these in a bunch of presentations before. I'm collecting them in one place because before we even start talking about an evaluation tool, we have to talk about what the rules are for success. First thing is discipline. If you see sloppiness in any area of your project, then that is a sign that your project has taken on a significant risk. Enterprise projects are not places for people or processes that wing it or are undefined. Discipline has no shortcuts and no substitution. You need to emphasize to everybody on your team that the way to be exceptional is to be consistent. Consistency allows us to measure with confidence, period over period, whether or not we are meeting, exceeding, or falling behind our goals. If people are wildly inconsistent, if the process is wildly inconsistent, those measurements are absolutely meaningless. So consistency shows up in a lot of places. Discipline in your enterprise project management solution, in other words, keeping those user stories and bug statuses up to date and making sure you're doing a good, thorough planning evolution the exact same way each time, and that you are remediating gaps as they come up and then updating the process and then educating people about the process. You cannot be consistent to a process or work habit that no one has told you about. 180% tool beats 2 or more tools. You've heard me say it before. A man with 1 watch knows what time it is. A man with 2 is never sure. This is a more than 100-year-old quote that is still true. Trying to search for the perfect tool when a good tool is readily available, or trying to get best of breed, which is an absolute enterprise disease that will kill your project, is just unacceptable, right? Find the 80% tool, and a good tool is a tool that everybody already pretty well knows and is comfortable with or can be made comfortable with quickly. An okay process carefully followed is much better than a perfect process ignored. I see huge chunks of project budget being spent in these little ivory tower working groups while people are trying to come up with a perfect something. And again, they ignore the 80% rule, the Pareto rule, and they ignore consistency. And so get a process that mostly works, that everybody follows, and of course you can iterate on it. That's perfectly okay. But again, if you're going to change things, you have to include everyone in the change by educating them. And a place for everything and everything in its place. I cannot emphasize to you enough how important it is to have one place for everything. One source control system. One build system. One wiki, one place to manage all of the user stories, bugs, tasks, whatever. One everything else. One place. Only one place. And again, if that one place is only kind of 80% of what you need, it's better than having things in 2 places. So let's talk about the tool, the POSI tool. The way it works is very, very simple, and this is intentional. There aren't a lot of complicated curve fittings and things like that you might find in Barry Bame's methodology or Stephen Soder's methodology or whatever. Instead, this is an evaluation tool that gives you kind of an overall impression of how well you are conforming to the expected enterprise norm. And the elements are selected based on our experience of looking across a wide variety of projects and finding the common threads and habits. A lot of things that you would think might be in here are not, because they're not cross-cutting or common, and some things you may not have considered are. Again, this is a base tool. You can go download it from my GitHub site and modify it to suit your needs. You're probably going to want to play with the weights of each of the categories. Some of the categories will need to be weightless for you. You just set the weight to 0 and ignore it. So with that, okay, here's the POSI tool. It's a very simple Excel spreadsheet. You'll notice that down the left-hand side we have categories, and then inside each category we have different elements. You give them a letter grade based on, where you think things are. If you're missing it all together, it gets an F. You'll notice that columns B through H are hidden. I'm going to unhide them just to show you what the underlying mechanism is. So the grades get looked up from this lookup here, and we've given each letter grade a percentage. We also have a little table of expected ratios of team member type based on the expected percentages. Your mileage may vary for both of those, so those are two places that you can tweak. Likewise, the weight that you give each of the cofactors can be adjusted. These are the recommended ones that I use by default. And then you have the sum of all of your scores and the sum of all the total possible, and you get just a percentage grade, and that's pretty obvious. So I'm going to go ahead and hide these columns again, and we're going to go through the way that you would do it. Now, typically, a good way to do this is go through and tweak this template version to suit yourself, and then make copies and give it out to people, have them fill it out, and just like planning poker, if you disagree on the letter grade of something by more than 1 or 2, discuss the high one, discuss the low one, and why, and then vote again. And then you'll end up with a rough grade. Again, this isn't the perfect tool. This is the 80% tool. It was something that was fast and easy. We were able to go through all of our different architecture and project evaluations that we had done before. We collected all of the common threads that ran through them. We tried to give them proportional weights to how important we think they are. And so, you can go through and very quickly rate these. So if you have an architectural review board, but it doesn't meet that often, maybe it gets a B grade. If you have architectural standards and they're only kind of so-so, then maybe that's a C grade. If you have good process pipelines for build, deploy, and release, give yourself an A. If you have a change process standard, so we're in the middle of an impulse. What's an impulse? An impulse is whatever your increment of time is for planning. So if you do it quarterly, it's a product interval, project interval, or you do 2 sprints at a time or 3 sprints at a time. Those are all impulses. Whatever the standard is, when you begin, you decide what you're going to do. When you end, you decide if you've done it, and then you decide what you're going to do next time. A little scrummy in that regard. So suppose you're pretty good about that, and so on and so forth. And you'll go through and you'll rate yourself, and it will give you a percentage. And it will give you the percentage color code will change. So, for example, kind of weak SMEs and weak leads and architects, and your DevOps is kind of so-so, and your support mechanism is non-existent, etc., etc. You go through and you give yourself grades on all of these things, and what's left over is the score. So hopefully this helps. My name's Stuart. Thank you for your kind attention. If you liked this, please consider liking and subscribing.